recording on a Sunday afternoon the week before Thanksgiving, and Danville is actually sunny today. It's been a little cray-cray weather the last few days with torrential downpour and winds, and I was actually able to get out and do a hike and get some exercise. So I'm feeling blessed.
And yeah, it's kind of sunny and chilly here in Oakland. I first off, maybe I'll look out to the folks in the Pacific Northwest. Certainly Heather, the toner queen. I hope she's okay, and everybody up
And
there in the
Julia,
Pacific.
her girlfriend there, who's also in procurement, posted really sad photos of damage from the storm in that area. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, when the bomb cyclone goes through, that's pretty brutal. And we had one here 2 years ago, and we had major damage ourselves. So, just thinking about all the folks up there, because I mean, it sounds funny to put two words that should not go together: bomb cyclone.
Well, it's bad when the title of the type of weather is bomb cyclone. That's not a good.
Exactly.
That's
And
not a
then there is some serious flooding up in the Russian River and in the broader Bay Area. So anyway, but
Yeah.
it is sunny, as you said. It's gorgeous. I've still got a sweatshirt on because it's freezing. But
Yeah, it's like really cold, but again, sunshine is nice. So, we are going to chat about something that we feel gets kind of ignored in a lot of the LinkedIn content and conversations and maps and things that have been produced over the last year. I spent a fair amount of time in this space, so I'm going to share some of my thoughts and insights. But topic for today is orchestration for directs. So we feel like direct procurement and folks working in direct kind of get the shaft. There's not a lot of focus on it. So today is the day where we are going to talk about the underrepresented side of the procurement world.
And I will set this up, and as with all the topics that I sort of lead, it'll be more of a meandering discussion rather than highly structured, but we'll see where it goes. So the origins of today's topic. I was recently at DPW. I'm not sure if I've mentioned that or not, but back in October, and that was a joke. That was sarcasm, because I can't shut up about it.
You're the fangirl for DPW.
Totally. But anyway, I was on one of the expo floors, and I ran into Spencer Penn, the founder of LightSource, and big fan of Spencer and all the folks
Shout out to
there.
the Bay Area. They're based here.
Based here near Japantown. Great restaurants over there. And so we were sort of just chit-chatting about what we were seeing, and he made an interesting observation, is that there weren't a lot of direct material startups there. And I was like, yeah, for the most part, Creatives, which is a data company, but where they do directs, but they also do indirects. But I mean, other than them and a couple others, maybe, that were sort of like on. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, so please don't at me. But it was by and large demonstrably indirect, or sort of more bigger plays like orchestration. And then that got us, Spencer and I were talking about that, like, orchestration was the topic. And Jason Bush wrote an interesting reflection on DPW that about there was a Coupa, Ariba, I want to say, I can't remember who the third one was, maybe iValua. There was sort of a debate, sort of best of breed versus legacy source to pay platform. And what he wrote, which I thought was very insightful, is that that seemed to be like, it was a good discussion to have, but it seemed anachronistic compared to all the discussion and excitement and maybe a little hype around orchestration. And it seemed like we had turned the corner to orchestration more so than the old the old dialogue. So with that, so Spencer and I were talking about, we are also talking about this orchestration momentum, but we were then sort of musing, the both of us, that there's really not a lot of orchestration for directs because it plays a different role the way we engage with it, and we will unpack that a little bit here. But what I thought was really poignant is orchestration is just not a clear, you don't layer on orchestration on top of directs, because directs has a whole different process and set of ways of coming to market. And so, and I do have to give one other shout out before we open this up to discussion, but Opstream, I will give them credit because they talk about directs for orchestration. Sorry. They talk about orchestration for directs, and they have a solution offering around it. And I'm not saying that others don't have it, but I've seen webinars and content specifically for orchestration and directs. And so this has just been sitting in my craw for a couple of weeks now. And so I thought we'd take this opportunity to talk about directs and orchestration, and more broadly, sort of some of the underrepresented discussion around directs. So that's the preamble.
So, I think it's important to set the stage around what orchestration means. So, how do you define orchestration? Because I feel like every company, every procure tech company is saying they do orchestration.
Yeah.
Whether it's an orchestration only platform, whether it's an existing platform that has expanded or has an add-on module or has built it. So what does it mean to you?
To me, it is so while many platforms have orchestration parts to them, I think you can have that. But what I'm looking at is really in the context of next generation procurement platforms.
Mhm.
And this will undoubtedly get into in future episodes. But if you have the source to pay suites, and we moved away from that to the explosion of best in breed, we're now moving to the next generation, which is, I would argue, the next generation platforms, which are the orchestration players, which would be Zip, Level Path, Oro, Opstream, Omnia, and
Airbase.
Airbase, Pivot, Tonkian. I can't believe I remembered most of those. So those to me represent, because they're looking at not just one element of it, but they're looking at how you orchestrate everything. And then you give that singular user interface to procurement and then to the business. And those interfaces would be different to the supplier. That would be different too. And so over time, the next generation platform has to be built around this idea of orchestration and orchestrating all the complexity and giving a better user experience. And naturally, it's not only going to be orchestration, but AI. And what will really separate that new generation of platform from the old generation is that ability to embed AI in the core of the product. Because all the legacy stuff, you're going to have to go back. I mean, it's not going to work. You can't take an old Java-based application and slap AI on top of it and call it a new platform.
Well, you can and people are, but it's not legit.
Yeah, it's not legit. Yeah, so
For me, I look at it as a simple, easy intake interface for whoever the stakeholder is. But the most important thing for me is the intelligence piece.
yeah.
So knowing who I am and knowing my behaviors and creating a custom experience for me. So if I'm in marketing, it may ask me different questions. It may guide me down a path, sharing best practices. Here's what you did during your last program or last initiative. So I think the intelligence piece is the really, really important factor, which will be heavily driven by AI.
Yes, couldn't agree more.
So, okay, good. So we've kind of set the stage on how we're defining orchestration because it's just used so much. I feel like half the time I'm not sure that people are even talking about the same thing when they're using. It's almost like the next
There
buzz,
is no
right?
doubt about that. There is no doubt about that.
So I spent about 2.5 years on the direct side. So I'll start with maybe sharing a little bit about my experience. In my last role, we were selling into mid-market manufacturers. So we're looking at 250 million to a billion or two in revenue. So not super small, but not the large enterprise. And selling into manufacturers is really, really hard. Um, and I think there's several factors why, but I'll focus on a couple that I think are relevant for this conversation. I think the first is you have small procurement functions, at least in small and mid-market manufacturers. Enterprise, different world. But in this case, you've got teams of often less than 10 people, and you don't have someone that's owning the digital transformation or the innovation or technology piece. Often these folks are also have been at the same company for a very, very long time. They're kind of in status quo mode. I don't see a lot of them bringing in the sharp 20 or 30-year-olds to come in and change things up and disrupt and practice or test out or start talking about using new technology. So you've got a small team, no one really focused on the tech or innovation piece within the procurement org. And then you've got people that are set in their ways. And so the thought of having to come in and reconstruct the whole way that you run the operation, I think is really, really challenging. So that makes anyone who has a newer innovative solution on the direct side that is specifically focused at supply chain and procurement makes it tough. And then you've got to figure out who actually you should be selling to within the org. And oftentimes it's operations. So while the end user may be procurement or supply chain, it's often the head of operations, a VP of operations at that size company that's the one that's actually making the decision and saying yes and no to deals.
I'm going to interject here. On the people, on what you just described, I have the saying that we have all the technology in the enterprise we could possibly need, or at least within 18 months we will. The problem is Excel and apathy. And what you just described is exactly the problem. And those people, and I've talked to them, I've interviewed them, they come to work and it's just good enough to send out RFPs in Excel and email, and nobody's too fussed by it. And like you said, it's an amorphous reporting structure. And so putting these technologies in, it's like, why should we do it? And I think we're rapidly getting to the point where we can't run supply chains like that. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is we on the indirect side, and this is where our focus sometimes gets a little fractured. We often think of we raise a requisition and we have to go source. And so it's always intake source, or intake requisition, et cetera, et cetera. It is very dynamic and it's always changing, which it is very, very true on the indirect side. However, on the direct side, you have a product like an iPhone, and you're designing it for years, and your bill of materials and all the stuff is done like figured out years in advance, and then you source it, and then you have it is in essence an open requisition that sits in your ERP system, and so you already have the built-in pricing, and you might even have pricing that decreases each year. But essentially that requisition just gets filled or just gets ordered against. And so it's not this continual source or resource and whatnot. And so because you have critical materials, you can't just trade out one supplier for another. Oftentimes there needs to be quality, test, QA, and other engineering and safety, and even risk sign-offs. So it's a much bigger animal.
Yeah, and I would say a miss that I saw in many organizations is procurement was not brought in at the very beginning in the design and
Yep.
engineering process. I think that is just an absolute miss for organizations. So what happens more often than not is engineering and product will build and design something, and then they bring procurement in at the very end. And procurement is then more transactional and going out and sourcing what has been already spec'd, and to your point, doesn't leave a lot of room for flexibility. You've got maybe one or two suppliers, we have to have this part, we have to have this material, versus procurement being brought in at the very, very beginning to provide input that may change the design or may change the way. So I think that's also a really big limitation. And it takes a leadership shift. I mean, that is an executive level leadership, top down cultural shift that needs to happen within manufacturing organizations. If that was the case, I think we would see more adoption of these sort of technologies for directs.
All right, so you've hit one of my hot buttons. We need a little sound effect for Eloise's hot buttons, where we hit one of those and it's um, I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, so one of the reasons, and I've been studying this for a long time, why doesn't procurement get brought into the design process earlier? This is the quintessential seat at the table discussion. Okay, we're going to design a new smartphone. So you're going to start a couple years in advance. So if you invite procurement to that design and engineering, there are statistics that you can engineer a ton of cost out just when you're designing the product, which is great if you have that sourcing expertise at the table. Problem is the folks that sit at that table don't bring the best, and they're just not bringing they're not living up to the potential of that ideal. And I don't like to besmirch and take shots at procurement folks, because I think there's enough people doing that.
Meaning
But
they're not
in
representing themselves well in those
correct,
conversations.
yeah, and I mean, and I say that lovingly to the profession, because I think I'm well on established on record that I am very much a cheerleader for the profession. However, that said, when it comes to direct material sourcing, we have a long way to go. And if you're going to be invited in, you better walk in day one to that those design sessions with all sorts of data, or you should be able to pull up all kinds of data and bring not only supply market data, performance data of existing suppliers, capabilities of suppliers, pricing, et cetera, benchmarks. And so, absent that, and I know we don't do that because almost no company has all that material or data at their fingertips. So we're not even arming the procurement folks, even if they had the capabilities to sit at that table. And this is one of the areas I really hope that we make a lot of progress on, because for all the reasons we stated, we got to get up into on directs, we got to get into those engineering conversations.
Well, and it's interesting, when I was working on the direct side, there was a few cases where the procurement practitioners were former engineers.
Hmm.
And I thought that's an interesting strategy if an organization is looking to up-level their procurement department and
Yep.
they're wanting to bring procurement in at the very beginning. Think about hiring product or engineer people in that role, because when they go into those meetings, they are going to have more credibility and have more knowledge because they were in those roles themselves. And I thought that was an interesting strategy.
And I would say, and I sometimes am not as kind as I am to my Carney colleagues, but almost all of my Carney colleagues are engineers in college or undergrad for sure, and that's one of the hallmarks of Carney, and that helps a lot in the sourcing and design work that we help our clients do. So, so I think that's a really great shout out. Where am I thinking today? It's a very great call out to that bringing engineers into procurement can help change that
Yeah.
dynamic.
So another observation that I noticed, especially again working in the mid-market direct space, is companies spend what they feel is a large amount of money on their ERP,
Mhm.
and everything needs to work with the ERP.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, forget it.
Yeah.
Because in their minds, they spent so much time, not only time, but or not only money, but all the time and resources to get the whole organization into new processes and new systems, getting people trained. So you've got a scenario where you have often these manufacturing firms using direct focused ERPs that they have spent probably their biggest technology investment. Well, a lot of these ERP solutions are very old school and antiquated. So you
Oh,
can't easily just integrate newer innovative solutions to the ERP. So that causes a whole realm of challenges. Thinking about having to do integrations just kind of makes procurement cringe. So what they do is they just try to finagle the ERP to do a band-aid solution for whatever they need to solve versus investing in new software.
yeah, it's yeah, it's funny you brought this up because this was also on my list. And I was actually talking to a venture capital firm this week, and they were asking me about transportation management systems and asking for my evaluation on a couple. And and the lack of adoption. I said almost the same thing. The ERP casts a very long shadow,
Yeah.
and I mean, I just wrote a book about dismantling the ERP myth, and we have to get beyond this idea that the ERP is everything for supply chain. But certainly, it's fine as a transactional system, but it's terrible for some of the ancillary things like planning, like sourcing, like transportation, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's okay. I'll give it an okay for backbone transactions, but like it's not good for interacting, and that really drives people. Besides apathy, it drives people, bad ERPs drive people to excel in email because that's the only way to actually functionally do what you need to do.
Well, and I would add on to that that you're going to attract a certain type of talent if you have these old school ERPs. The cool hip 21-year-old grad who's super tech friendly is not going to want to go work at a mid-market manufacturer that has an ERP that was built out 30 years ago and hasn't changed. So you're also then attracting a certain talent and type of person that is not necessarily going to question the status quo or be open to adopting. So there's kind of like a full cycle there.
Well, and I also use this in my presentations. I talk about that exactly because if you let's break it by like break millennials to older millennials and younger millennials. If you have younger millennials and Gen Z and even Gen Alpha, if you give them an like an old ERP interface, you're basically communicating that you hate them. And I'm not exaggerating. Well, that's meant it usually garners a laugh to my audiences. That's I mean that seriously, and because they have grown up in such a technology rich environment, many of those folks grew up with smartphones or iPads, and I know older millennials is a little different, but
I'm an
they
older
grew.
millennial. I'm 41, so I'm barely in the category.
Yes, but but yeah, I didn't want to say anything or make judgments about anybody's generational status, but the younger millennials have grown up with smartphones, or they're using really sophisticated, like they've come to expect really smart technology, and then some for some reason we come to the corporate world, and here's your big ERP interface, which was, as you said, designed 30 years ago, and we gaslight everybody into saying, well, that's the way it is. That's the best, and it's got AI in it, and it's got whatever else in it, and I mean, it's just, I mean, it's not even on the same plane. Like we're not even having, we're speaking Spanish and I don't know something else. It's just not even in the remote Spanish versus Martian. I mean, that's it. That's and so that like it really, as you said, to really amplify your point, no youngin wants to go deal with a ERP
You're gonna
system.
cringe and take another job. I mean, you're just not
Right.
gonna go work there. It's just not worth it.
Exactly. And so we've really, this is why I'm so anti ERP I don't mind ERPs on their own, but we really need to move to newer versions, newer, like reimagined ERPs, because what passes for an ERP system today is just bad. And there's just so many entrenched interests, whether it's the systems integrators, the tech providers themselves, the analysts, the CIOs. I mean, I take the CIOs to task for perpetuating this myth, and everybody should be taken to task for this, because we're creating a cycle where core elements of supply chain, especially manufacturing, are are just like, there's a death grip by these legacy systems that are just hurting us as a profession.
And I think one of the reasons why NetSuite, for example, has been so successful, one, they have a much lower price point, so the barrier to entry is a lot less than something like an SAP or an Ivalua or a Jagger, but they have positioned themselves as being very partner friendly.
Yeah.
So they have built out a store where you can actually go in and find solutions that have REST API integrations that are fully built and ready to go. So their whole pitch was use our ERP and we're partner friendly and you can integrate just about any platform you want. And I think that was a smart angle and play for them, because a lot of the legacy ERP systems, on top of being dinosaur and clunky and super hard to use, you also can't integrate anything with them.
Yeah.
And so the whole partner play just becomes really challenging. So I think that's another thing we have to factor into the world of directs, is the inability for a lot of these legacy systems to integrate with newer technology.
And I would also flag Odoo, ODOO, which is a new upstart in the ERP
Which
space.
has got a nice infusion of investment in the last, what was that, couple weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So they're on the move, and like we have to look at Seattle, because AWS, Amazon Web Services, came out last year with their supply chain, what I'm calling a sort of a new generation ERP, which is broader, and underselling it a little bit. But I think Amazon, AWS, at least as an outside, I'm an outsider, I don't know any inside information, but as an analyst is studying this, or I don't think I'm an analyst, am I? Anyway, whatever I am, as I see
You're a
then.
little bit of a unicorn. We'll you have some analyst in you.
Yes. So the analyst part of me watches that and says that Amazon really wants to move into this space, and they have a very legitimate shot at capturing a lot of this market, because if you sort of sideline the CIO, then you have a real legitimate chance to make a difference, especially at these mid markets that you were, manufacturing firms that you were talking about.
So where do you see, so we're coming on end of 2024. Where do you see changes happening, if any, on in the direct space for 2025?
Well, I think, what will I say? How do I really, how do I phrase this? I think we have been on a journey since 2020 to where supply chains, and specifically the brittle nature of supply chains, has come to the forefront. They snapped and broke and into 100 pieces in 2020, and we glued them back together. I think since then we've been on this journey to improve all elements of supply chain, and I argue frequently that this is a 10 or 20-year shift. So this is not going to be solved overnight, and it has everything to do from data exchange to risk to offshoring, or reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, all this other, these changes, these buzzwords. changes in shipping and changes in it, like we are in the midst and it's early days of this major transition. And by the way, we have all sorts of legislation in the EU. We have maybe less regulation in the US and perhaps less coming. So, but fundamentally, all these supply chains are getting redesigned because they have to be, but the digital is not keeping up. And so, as I look at direct, both sourcing and just direct solutions, we really have to pay close attention because we are we are going into this next, let's call it 2-decade change. And if we're still doing email and Excel, which we are still doing, we are at a severe disadvantage.
I think for me, the thing I'm going to follow most closely on the direct space next year is if AI agents start getting adopted by direct teams. And I think,
I was just going to comment that I don't want to hear about AI agents. So that's so funny you said
but
that.
the reason I say that is there is so much Excel and email happening on the direct
It's,
side, right? I mean, that is where your buyer lives right now. It is still Excel. And the question is, can something Kavita, for example, is another provider in the post PO space. They're in Europe, and their whole play is, can they get adoption with this whole AI agent model to replace 70-80% of the work that a buyer is doing? That's the very tactical work. It's the follow-up, it's the manual. Can those organizations come to a place where they're willing to test and potentially adopt? And the answer is, I don't know. A lot of the manufacturers that I interacted with are pretty old school and pretty risk adverse. So I'm not sure that we're at the place next year where we're going to see widespread adoption in the directs of AI bots or AI agents taking over and replacing and or complementing the work of buyers.
yeah, and look, I'm big on AI agents, and we will, I just to bookmark this, we are, or to tease, foreshadow this. I knew the word would come eventually. Well, I'm going to foreshadow this. So we will be talking more about AI agents in the coming weeks. And I've already, well, anyway, and so I'm big on this, but I'm wildly skeptical for the same reasons you just said. I don't think we're going to just drop agents into direct materials management or sourcing, because I don't think that's. I think eventually we'll get there, but anybody that comes out at the beginning of 2025 and is like AI agents for direct materials, I'm going to just look at them askew because I'm not buying it in January of
Well,
2025.
and if so, I'd love to see it in action. I'd love
Yeah,
to
exactly.
actually see an organization leveraging and using that and replacing the people oversight.
Yeah, exactly. And so, uh, will it come? Absolutely. But do not be posting on LinkedIn about about agents and direct materials in January.
So, given that, so that's again, that's kind of where what I'm going to be following closely in the space is not only agents but usage of AI. How is the direct world going to be leveraging? I think yes, automation of some manual work. I also could see it being used more in the predictability space. So, taking data and insights and providing buyers and procurement organizations with data so they can get it faster and then have that to make better, more accurate decisions, especially when it comes to risk. If you have that data, I feel like you can do more. So I do think we will see some more progressive manufacturers leveraging AI for that reason.
Yes, I would also say that most of these mid-sized manufacturers, not most, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot are owned by private equity. So over time, private equity will force a lot of these changes that we're talking about. So that's a midterm, sort of mid longer term trend. I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I wouldn't say that's a prediction, but I just think that efficiency is always the play when you're part of a portfolio of other assets. And so If it is, so we'll see how that plays out. But going back to our previous discussion, the big thing for me, and it enables what you were just saying, is how are we going to move to this next generation ERP, or what I would really say next generation supply chain platform? And I think on one hand, we'll have the NetSuite and Udo's. On the other hand, we'll have the cloud players like AWS. Remains to be seen who else wants to compete with AWS. But there are several that could legitimately play in that space. Or is there something brand new that we haven't thought about or we haven't seen? And so that could happen too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what happens in the manufacturing space starts with the enterprise players, and they'll make changes and things will work or not work, and then the mid and smaller manufacturers will kind of adopt. I don't often see them being first to market or the first movers.
Yeah. No, yeah, well, and we can blame CIOs for that.
So I think we're going to see the larger manufacturing firms taking some of these risks and making some of these investments and mistakes, right? They're going to learn and see what does and doesn't work before we see some of this funnel down to the mid-market and smaller manufacturing firms. For those listening who work in procure tech, who have solutions on the direct side, I think my big recommendation is figure out your talk track and your messaging around the ERP.
Yeah.
You're going to need to know going into calls and conversations that is going to come up in every conversation around we've already made a major investment in our ERP. We're moving from on-prem to cloud. We're going to be doing an upgrade in the next 12 months. Do you integrate? So you need to figure out what you're going to say because it's going to come up and it's something that you need to be able to talk. And maybe your answer is we don't need to integrate with your ERP at all. Or maybe you do need to integrate and you need to talk about how that's going to be seamless.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And I also think there might be more room for folks that startups in the direct space, but I think it is clear, and I don't think this is a secret to anybody, or I don't think I don't think this is controversial, that it is clearly directs is a whole different ball game than indirects, and that's not to say one is better than the other. Oftentimes it feels like uh, we we feel like, well, one is separate or different than the other, and we keep them at arm's length, or we're not part of the same family. But oh, that's an adopted cousin or something. But the reality is, we're all like, it's right hand, left hand. Just we so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other comments or feedback you want to give around the directs?
So what I will say is, because I've been so excited about this. So Spencer and I are going to do some joint content. I'm going to be on his, get interviewed by him. I'm going to go over to his offices in a few weeks. And we're going to, because there's a passion there. You should have seen us on the phone the other day. He was in an Uber. And
you guys were nerding out on directs.
Totally. And all I could think is, what's this Uber driver thinking right now? But anyway, and by the way, Spencer and I are going to do this jointly, and there's no money. So this is totally passion project between us, but we're going to hopefully continue this dialogue and really talk through and just sort of boost up direct as a topic. Not that it's new. It's just bringing that topic back into the forefront.
Yeah. For those listening that work in directs, please drop a note or comment on YouTube if you have additional thoughts or feedback or any innovations that you are seeing that you feel are top of mind or important for folks to know about as well. I feel like it's kind of more of a legacy, older school part of procurement, but when you do dig, there are companies that are doing some cool and innovative things, and we want to make sure that those folks get highlighted. All right, with that, we are signing off for today. We will see you next Wednesday morning for our next episode.